why don't you just give us a thumbs up and let us know you can hear us, so that we're sure that you can hear our audio, you can see us. And Peter and John, you said there's already about a dozen people watching on your channel before
showing a dozen people watching. We're waiting to see the stream go live. Hasn't come in yet, but we know there's a delay, so we'll let you know. Oh, here it is.
So now we'll be 15 seconds behind as we talk to that screen and not this one.
No, we're there. We see we're up.
Yeah,
sounds good. If you are watching,
so people can tell.
Yeah, if you are watching, please give us a thumbs up. Let us know. Catherine says we can hear you, and she's here. Good. Thanks for hanging out. Rayleigh's here. Thanks for hanging out. And and there's somebody with a chicken icon who says he can also hear us. So we're gonna go with that.
I also see that Joe, the computer guy, is with us. Nice to see you, Joe. I hope all is well with you.
How's the weather in BC, Peter and John?
I'm gonna hold this up just to show people I'm not lying. Just to prove I'm not lying. We're gonna show you what the current temperature is here where we are.
Whoa, that's 102. What's that in Canadian?
40 and change.
Yeah, that's quite hot.
We've seen people literally melting. You walk outside, it's not pretty.
Hey, if you're watching, wondering why we're starting out with some small talk, we're a few minutes ahead of time of the broadcast, but we just wanted to check our audio levels, make sure that you can see us, make sure we're on the right YouTube channels, and check all those things. Looks like loud and clear. Joe, the computer guy, says it's 104 in Washington. I'm wondering if that's Washington, D.C., or if that's Washington State. I would guess it's probably
that's got to be Washington State, and I'm guessing Joe isn't far from us. And maybe people can let us know where they are in the chat too. And since we're talking about temperature, maybe tell us what their temperatures are.
Oh, Rayleigh says that's 38.9 degrees Celsius in Canada. So
yeah, and most of the people on your screen, Rayleigh, are in Canada, and shame on us for talking in Fahrenheit.
It's all right. It is what it is.
We like to hang out with older Canadians who are used to the imperial system. So, we can talk in miles per hour and miles per gallon, and nobody freaks out.
Of course. Wesley, you're watching from Calgary. What's the weather? Or you're not watching, you're hanging out with us from Calgary. What's the weather like there?
Yeah, it's bright and sunny here. Not quite as hot as BC, so I'm thankful to be here. It's not, so it's still very hot. So keeping indoors, keeping cool, drinking lots of water. So, yeah.
That's good news. Don, I see that you're in your RV. This is the first broadcast we've done where you've been in your RV. Where exactly are you located?
I'm actually in my RV in Elkhart at the, maybe I shouldn't say, I'm in the Elkhart campground. Somebody come knocking on my door. Yeah, right. 75 degrees here, a little rainy. We had some storms come through. Actually, most of the town of Middlebury is out of power because of some storms that came through last night. So it's pretty ugly.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Wow.
Is it really hot?
No, 75 degrees. It was hot, and then the storms came in, and the temperature dropped.
Yeah, great. Oh, good.
Great. I see Catherine put a question up. So Catherine, just to let you know, Adam hasn't officially started us yet because we're not quite there. We're letting people come in. We're up to 47 people. Let's make sure we answer that question because that's right up our alley.
It is a good question. And I didn't get to talk about the weather here. I'm actually broadcasting from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And yes, that is in English. And it is just north of the Montana border. And it is a typical Saskatchewan August. It's about 12 degrees Celsius today, which I joke. It's not a typical Saskatchewan August, but today it's maybe what's that in Fahrenheit? Maybe mid 50s, low 50s, somewhere in there. It's kind of atypical, but listen, we're not arguing after the heat wave we had last week. So
yeah, well, and I'm sure as part of the chat and even answering Catherine's question when we go officially live momentarily here, I'm sure we'll talk about how we are keeping cool here in such intense temperature, and we're only on a 30 amp hookup.
That's right.
That will be a good question. We're going to make sure we jump that. I've starred your question, Catherine, so we make sure we jump right in there. Well, let's officially start. Thank you so much for everybody for hanging out today, whether you're hanging out with us on Peter and John, the RVgeeks YouTube channel, or whether you're hanging out with us on the Xantrex channel. Maybe just put it in the chat. Let us know which channel you're hanging out. We could see all of the chat on our end, but we're not exactly sure which chat you are in. So let us know exactly which chat you're watching from. Currently, we've got 61 viewers, and we've got, I'm sure, a few more people who are going to join as they're getting the notifications and the email reminders. Peter and John, tell us a little bit about what you're looking forward to today. I know the title of the broadcast today is your first year, 1 year into having your Xantrex system. So tell us a little bit about how that has benefited you in the last year.
Well, I'll tell you quickly how it's benefiting us right now. And this jumps right into something we were discussing before we went live. And that is that having solar power, most people think of that as being when they are off grid. Well, right now we're in a situation where we are on grid. We're at a 30 amp hookup, but we have a large motorhome, 43 feet long with 2 air conditioners, but we're only on a 30 amp hookup. And we would not normally be able to run both of our air conditioners simultaneously on a 30 amp hookup and have anything else work, because every bit of that power would be needed to run the air conditioners. So in 102 degree temperatures, which we're in right now, what we've done is we've turned off the charger and run everything else on our RV, our refrigerator, our lighting, our computers, our modem are all running off our Xantrex lithium battery and our Xantrex solar panels. And the only thing that's running off the power pedestal are air conditioners. So without that, we would not be comfortable right now without solar even hooked up.
Yeah, we would end up having to do something like keep one of the, half of the RV closed off and only run one air conditioner in order to keep that area cool. And then, of course, you're fighting the battle of then cooling off the other part when it's, when you have the power available. So even when we're not boondocking and using the power for everything, we can still put it to use. And if nothing else, if you're on a site that, you're paying monthly and you're maybe paying your electric bill, you can offload some of that and let the sun take care of your bill for you. So we're doing that as well.
And if it's okay, that I'll very quickly answer Catherine's question about that, since we're on the topic. Sorry for just diving right in. But we don't actually run our air conditioners off our battery system. I know one of the biggest discussions people have is, can you run air conditioning off solar and batteries? And you can to some degree, but we don't. When it gets brutally hot, really brutally hot, we either run our generator or we hook up. And that's partly because in reality, without a tremendous solar and battery bank, running your air conditioner can only be done for a somewhat limited amount of time. It's not feasible for extensive use, although it can be a stopgap to keep you from boiling to death when it's really hot.
And part of that is also a result of the way our Newmar is wired. So, of course, ours came from the factory with an inverter. And so all of the inverted circuits are in their own dedicated circuit breaker box, and the ones that are not inverted, so the air conditioner, the block heater for our engine, our washer and dryer, those are actually in a separate breaker box and do not receive 120 volt power when we're running off our inverter. So if we wanted to rewire the RV in order to enable that capability, it would be a rewiring job. We would have to, restructure things, and that was just not worth it for us because, like Peter said, we would rather go to a hookup or run the generator for the period of time we needed to run the air conditioner.
Yeah, if we were going to do that, we would have done a different audit, which we'll talk about today, and we would have gotten a larger battery bank and a larger solar bank to accommodate that.
But I think also just, again, sorry, not to commandeer, but to fully answer the question you asked, Adam, which is how has it been for this past year? I would sum it up in one word, which is awesome.
Great.
We love dry camping. We love being out in the boondocks and, not being hooked up. And this was our first year with having, this amount of solar and this size lithium battery and having everything all running. And we literally had to keep a calendar reminder in to run the generator to exercise it because we had no need to run it for any other reasons. So, without having done that, then our generator would have sat for months at a time without being run at all because we had no need.
Well, we're going to dig into all kinds of questions. Catherine, I hope that answered your question up front there. We're going to dig into all kinds of questions. We had a bunch of questions that came in ahead of time, and we have lots of people watching. You're welcome to drop your questions in the chat. And not only are Peter and John here with us to answer your questions, but also Wesley Schoon and Don Wilson. Wesley, tell us a little bit about what you do at Xantrex, more specifically, and the kinds of questions that I'll be throwing your way tonight.
Oh, thanks, Adam. My name is Wesley, and I'm the solar product manager at Xantrex, and I look after our solar panels, our solar charge controllers, and a bit of an expert on solar here. So definitely any questions related to, solar panels and, how many solar panels do you need, or what type of charge controller should you use, kind of the pros and cons with different choices. It's not always black and white, and every system is different. And so I do my best to give you the facts and what's best for your needs.
And also Don Wilson, the tech doctor, is here. Now, Don Wilson serves two purposes tonight. He's the one who we're going to send the most intense questions. And the second purpose is he's the one who's here to keep me in line. So Don, thank you so much for hanging out tonight.
My pleasure.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Xantrex, and then we're going to jump into some questions.
So when I'm not doing tech doctor stuff, my alter ego is an applications engineer. So I work in the sales group, but I'm the technical side of the sales group. So I help the RV manufacturers with installing to code, installing in ways that keep problems out, and helping design systems, things like that.
So if you have a specific question about your system, Don is the guy who we're going to at least throw the question to and see how well he does with answering that one. So I'm really excited to dive in. And I think a question that's on all of our mind, but specifically somebody named Bob Ants asked this ahead of time. He asked, how do I know how many solar panels I need for my RV? In his case, he's got a fifth wheel. But Wesley, how do you know how many solar panels you need for your rig?
Well, the nice thing about, I guess, a fifth wheel is that you have lots of rooftop space, and you can probably fit a lot of solar on top. But with regards to that question, how much solar do you need? The first thing I would ask is, what type of RVer are you? So if you're someone who likes to dry camp or boondock, or you're someone that's typically at the campgrounds and you're plugged into campground power or shore power and there's power 24/7. If you're someone who is plugged into the campground power all the time, you're probably not going to need a lot of solar, but you may want to have a small solar panel, like 100 watts or so, to provide trickle charging, keep your batteries topped off if you park somewhere and there's no power, or you're putting it in storage. So that might be useful. But if you're someone who boondocks and is out off grid, then solar would be probably a more useful option. Now, there's other options of charging your batteries, such as your generator, or if you have a very large battery bank, that also helps. But one way is to calculate how much solar you need is really look at how much energy do you need? What are your daily energy needs? Because energy out equals energy in. And so one way is to if you have a battery monitor, you can look at how much energy you use in a day. Or if you don't have a battery monitor, you can put a list of all your electrical loads tied into your house batteries, and put that list together. How many watts is it, and then how many hours each of those loads run, and then aggregate it all into a single number of watt hours. So for example, let's say it's 1,500 watt hours in a day, and then that's how much you're going to use in a day. Divide that by 5. 5 represents the number of peak sun hours in the summer, and then you're left with 300 watts. And then typically I add like 30% on top of that. So let's say 300 watts, 400 watts. 400 watts of solar, so that could be 4 100 watt solar panels, or maybe 3 160 watt panels. That gives you a little bit more than 400 watts. But that typically would be how much solar you would need to satisfy your daily energy needs. So that is one common way to calculate how much solar you need. But I would say look at your application, look at how if you're a boondocker, dry camper, or you're at the campgrounds most of the time plugged in. So really consider that before you look at solar. But solar is a great option, especially if you're boondocking.
Yeah, so what Wesley's talking about is, I'm sorry, Adam, is really what we call on doing an audit. And it kind of gets back to what we spoke about just earlier with Catherine's question. When we did our audit, we have certain needs that we use. We have electronic equipment, computers, lighting, etc.
Residential refrigerator.
Our biggest thing of all is the residential refrigerator. And when we did our audit to see how much power we use, to tell us how much we need in lithium battery power or whatever type of battery you're using, and solar power, one of the things we looked at was, do we want to try to expand it to do something like run our air conditioner off? And had we taken that step to manage air conditioning, it would have upsized our system so dramatically that even though we have a lot of room on our roof, we didn't want to completely cover the roof with solar to make it more walkable so we can get up there for service purposes. So we opted to end our audit on the
at the air conditioner level,
this side of the air conditioner level, not to try to run that. But because we have a residential fridge, that made a big thing. If we had had an RV fridge, our electrical needs would have been a lot less, because that's the biggest single user of power.
So if somebody has a battery monitor, obviously day-to-day use can fluctuate in your RV, how much power you use, whether you're out all day on a hike or whether you're sitting working on your laptop. How many days should a power audit stretch so you can get a proper average of how much power you're actually using?
I think longer would be better. It's not set in stone, but if you certainly at a very bare minimum, I would audit everything you do over a 24-hour period. If you can do that over 72 or 96 hours and then divide by that number of, divide by 24 for the number of days, what you're really looking for is how much draw do you use over a 24-hour period. And if you do that over a week and then divide by 7, it'll have the same effect and be more accurate.
Yeah, and just an example of one of the things that we hadn't necessarily thought of but actually factored in is, of course, with a residential refrigerator, it does do a defrost cycle on a regular schedule. So if your 24-hour window didn't encompass a defrost cycle, you're now looking at a lower power demand from that refrigerator than you actually would have. So, we did do a 72-hour window, which gave us, a better estimate based off of the fact that the refrigerator cycles the defrost cycle every once in a while.
And then round up.
And then round up. Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You have to
add
add
on larger.
You have to add in a factor. Let's say you determine that you're going to use 300 amp hours of power during your 24-hour period, which would be half of our 600 amp hour lithium eGen battery bank. You can't just go with 300. You've at least a factor of
put in a fudge factor.
Put in a fudge factor of 25% minimum.
Like Wes said.
Sounds good. Well, I'm seeing lots of other questions that are coming in the live chat, and we're going to make sure we get to as many of those as we can. We also had some questions come in ahead of time. Don, this question came in from Bob. He says he currently has an inverter charger set up. Is it practical to change to a Xantrex XC to do the all-in-one?
Yes, and I'll explain that a little bit. So if you think about electronics, whether you're talking about a DVD player or an inverter, what ages the componentry is thermal cycling. So it gets hot, it gets cold, it gets hot, it gets cold, and they're usually up against some kind of a heat sink, and so all that thermal cycling causes motion. So that's what causes wear. So if you have a converter and you have an inverter, when you're plugged in, the converter gets hot and the inverter just goes to idle. And then when you unplug, the converter gets cold or goes to room temperature, and then the inverter heats up. But when you have a combination unit, it's running all the time. So there's that benefit. The other benefit is that the installations are fairly easy to do. And when you get into power share, and that's the ability for the charger to derate when you run something heavy like the microwave. You turn on the microwave, you want your charger to derate so that you don't trip your shore power breaker. As a matter of fact, there's a video where it's on the Xantrex YouTube channel called "Replace a Broken Converter with a Xantrex Freedom Inverter Charger," and that's exactly what we did. Is we used an XC to replace a standalone inverter, a standalone converter in my personal motorhome, and so yeah, it's doable. It's recommended. It's a good idea.
Cool. We've got a couple questions coming in, both in the chat and also it came in ahead of time. Peter and John, can you just give us a high-level overview of the system? How many watts are the panels you have on the roof, the amp hours you have in your batteries? Just kind of give us a high-level overview so we kind of get a scope of what you've got going on your rig.
Sure. So we have 8 solar panels on our roof at the moment. We have 4 that are Xantrex solid state regular solid glass panels that are on tilt kits. Those are each 160 watts. And then we have 4 of the Flex Max panels, the ones that are basically peel and stick them to the roof. And so we have a total of 1,300 watts.
1,300 watts, right.
On the roof. That is then feeding down. It's actually set up as 2 separate solar systems. So the 4 Flex panels feed into one charge controller, and the other 4 panels feed into a second charge controller. Those are both 30 amp. And then that feeds our eGen 600 amp hour lithium battery. So we have the one giant battery in our battery tray. That's 600 amp hours. So that gets us right in that range. Normally you want to be at about 2.5 times your amp hour capacity of your battery.
2 to 2.5 times.
For your solar.
So if you have a 600 amp hour battery bank, your general target should be to have at least 1,200 watts of solar to feed 600. We went a little beyond that. So at least 2 times to 2.5 times your watts in solar compared to your amp hours in battery.
Yep.
Okay, so a question just came in for me. This is an exciting one. Steve is saying, I just got here. Can you start over? And the answer is no.
This will be available to watch afterwards, Steve. Sorry about that.
You can use the same link to watch the video as soon as we're finished, but enjoy the rest of it while you're here. Thanks for hanging out, Steve. That's a great question, a great sense of humor. Don, we've got a question from Russell. He says, I've got a Freedom SW3012 with an SCP and AGS in my RV. Should I consider adding a Combox? And can the Combox be used with an iPad? Could I use a hotspot for connectivity? Could you tell us a little bit of what all those acronyms mean?
Absolutely. So the SW is the sine wave inverter. It's our flagship. It's the 30,000 watt, 12 volt. The SCP is the system control panel, or what most people call the remote panel. And then the AGS is the automatic generator start module. So the Combox talks to all of these devices, and it's really kind of a neat piece of hardware that gives you a web server built in and a network connection to the Xantrex network of devices. So should you consider it? Absolutely. I have one. I like the Combox. I like what it does. It makes changing settings easier, and the home page is very graphical. It's makes it easy to see what's going on. The question of whether it can use for an iPad, we get this a lot because there's an Android app. There is not an iOS app, but because the Combox just runs off of an IP address, you can take an empty thumb drive, put it in the USB port. It'll write a file to the thumb drive. You can get your IP address of the Combox off that file, and then just type in that IP address into your Safari browser or Chrome browser or whatever, and then save that on your desktop. It's the same thing as having the app, because the app is nothing more than a package for the web page. So that's what I do with my iPad. I'm an iOS guy, and it's great for just having an easy way to connect to your system while sitting outside of your coach. You don't have to come inside.
Okay, Don, we've got another one from Jaybird, and Jaybird hooked up a 600 watt system with 4 lithium batteries to his 2001 Monaco, and he's got an older Xantrex 2500 inverter that came with the motorhome. He says it seems to work okay with solar, but not sure how well the generator charges those lithium batteries, since I seem to have no setting for those batteries. What do you suggest for a replacement inverter charger for this kind of setup?
The Freedom SW3000 would be a great replacement. So you have the Freedom 458 in that old Monaco. It's a modified sine wave inverter. It's a good inverter, but it doesn't have lithium charge settings. Yank that out, put in a Freedom SW3012, which would be a good solution. The one roadblock you're going to hit that's easily solved is the remote cable. So the new inverters use network cable instead of the old 4-wire phone cable. But if you're just going to a single remote, which you would in that Monaco, we have adapters. So you'll buy a kit, and it comes with 2 adapters, one for the inverter side, one for the remote side, and you get to still use your phone cable in the wall, so you don't have to string a new phone cable. And then it just adapts it back up to the network cable on the top and the bottom.
Sounds good. Jaybird, I hope that answers your question. If not, go ahead and leave a clarifying question there in the chat. We're getting lots of questions coming in the chat. We had lots of questions ahead of time. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. This came in on the chat. Peter and John, we've heard that solar panels produce a lot of heat. Have you noticed any heat coming through the roof from the flex panels installed directly on your roof?
That's actually an interesting question.
It's a tough one to answer, partly because we have a Newmar which has very good insulation in the roof. I'd suggest that that overcomes a lot of that. We haven't noticed that, but it could be because we have a pretty high-end motorhome.
Yeah, and so we only have they're reasonably spaced out on the roof, so they're not in one concentrated space where all 4 panels would be heating up a larger area that might be more noticeable. They are distributed across the roof, and again, because we do have a rather robust roof structure, we have not seen any noticeable change in the interior temperature as a result of having them. But if you did have a thinner ceiling, we could see that there would be some potential with just having no airflow underneath the flex panels.
And there are pros and cons when comparing rigid panels and flex panels, and the separation between the roof and the rigid panel is a positive for rigid panels for keeping the heat off the roof. But a big positive, of course, one of the biggest positives with flexible panels is peel and stick, no roof penetrations, no screws, ease of installation, and a guaranteed no leak installation with no inspections for leaking required.
We can say that in direct sun, right overhead noon type of scenario where all 4 panels are getting direct sunlight, we see that the flex panels, even though they are about 5 watts per panel more than the 160s, that the actual output from the flexes is about 3 to 4 amps in total from the charge controllers, a little bit lower than the rigid panels that have the air flowing underneath them. So in the heat of the day, you do see a slight reduction in their output capacity, but it is reasonably minimal. For all intents and purposes, the two systems are running pretty parallel to one another, and so that we don't see that being a factor either. A lot of people ask about whether or not the heating up would then impact their output.
Right, and that changes in the winter, of course, when the sun is very low in the sky and flexible panels can't be tilted, and rigid panels can be in many cases. And I know that's a question we're going to get into further on.
Yeah, so a follow-up question for you, Wesley, is about the flex panels. Is there any faster deterioration because the flex panel is directly on the roof and it reduces the airflow around that panel?
Yeah, so just adding to John and Peter's comments, flexible panels, because they're flush mounted against the roof, you don't want solar panels flying off, so you have to put sealant or glue or tape underneath to make sure those panels stick. But because they're flush, they can definitely heat up quickly and there's no airflow underneath. So on average, as a rule of thumb, depending on, of course, the amount of sun and the temperature conditions that you're in, probably comparable to a rigid panel, they're probably 10 to 20% less efficient, I would say, compared to a rigid panel in the same conditions. So solar panels, just in general, as they heat up, they will reduce their output. As far as deterioration, that would be a difficult one to answer. I would say it's not a primary factor. I think in general, if things just are operating at very hot temperatures, it's generally not a great thing, right? But solar panels are meant to be out in the sun. They're supposed to be in all weather conditions. They're supposed to last for years. So I would say it's not a primary factor with regards to flexible panels and with regards to their durability.
Yeah, I would say that because we have half of our system rigid and half of our system flexible, which we did intentionally to compare the two and to see how they work, the any degradation in output is negligible based on heat.
Right in that 10% range, we're talking about 3 amps out of 30. So
and our panels look today exactly like the day we put them on. So obviously they're not 10 or 15 years old yet for us to see, but the Xantrex panels are the sturdiest, flexible
really
panels we've ever seen. And another consideration I saw someone just mentioned about the weight savings that Never Stop Adventuring mentioned. There are reasons to go with flexible, despite the fact that there will be some additional heat output. And that is, again, the ease of installation, the no penetrations in the roof, and the weight savings, which can be a factor, especially if you're going to put them on a smaller RV or you're going to cover your entire roof. They are quite light and very easy to install.
They were a joy to install.
Oh, it was a piece of cake.
I also think on an application like an Airstream, it seems easier to install it on, an angled roof, a cornered roof, a rounded roof, than it would be with a rigid panel. Is that the case?
I think that the feet that come down do offset that pretty much. I think you can put either one on because it's only the corners of the rigid panels that are touching. So assuming you're not talking about a tremendously radiused corner, which an Airstream wouldn't have, you can do either one. Yeah. I think the biggest factors are weight and your choice of whether you are willing to penetrate the roof or not. I know that many people are very nervous about screwing down into the roof. We're fearless. But keep in mind,
like inspecting Dicor. It's
keep in mind that you have to inspect your roof no matter what. You're all Dicor, all roof penetrations, whether it's vents, fans, refrigerator vents, plumbing vents. You must get up on your roof and inspect at least a couple of times a year. It's just a few extra places to inspect.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it was definitely a concern when you guys were helping us with our Xantrex system. Was when the drill came out and I found out that was going through the roof of our rig.
If it makes you feel any better, Adam, after we screwed those screw holes into your roof, we did work on ours, and we took, not long ago, we took a hole saw, a 2.5-inch hole saw, and drilled a big open hole in our roof. That made us nervous, but we did it anyway.
We did think of you when we did that.
Well, one of the questions I had when we were setting up our rig is we already had a battery on our rig, and we were going to be adding on some lithium. And so Kenneth also is asking a question for Don. And Ken's question is, Don, can you mix batteries?
You can, but it's not a good idea. So it's kind of the same with solar. People say, "Oh, can I mix and mix?" Your system will always work to the weakest component. And so you can, it's just not a good idea. You're especially don't mix chemistries. If you've got a significant flooded battery bank and you want to add to it and you decide to bring a lithium into it, that's not a good idea.
No.
But I wouldn't mix batteries. When you're putting in a battery bank, make it a bank and buy them all together and make sure they're matched.
The only difference being, of course, for us, we have our chassis batteries. So all motorhomes are going to have a chassis battery to start the engine and a house battery bank. Those can be mixed. That's not a problem. Just make sure all the house batteries are the same and all the chassis batteries are the same. And I do want to clarify, when it comes to mixing solar, I mentioned we have flexibles and rigids. They're basically two separate banks with all of our rigids wired as a system and all of our flexibles wired as a system, which wasn't essential, not as important, but we chose to do that anyway to monitor the performance.
And actually, that's one of the nice things we like about the Xantrex system. Between the 160 watt rigid and the 165 watt flex, their specs are so close together that you really can intermix the two together, without much impact. Normally you'd have to worry about if they have different outputs in amperage or wattage, then you're going to be doing the same thing, which is basically drawing them to the weakest component and affecting the overall output. But the way the 160s and the 165s are set up, they really pair with one another really well. So it would have given us more flexibility had we needed to mix and match them a little.
Yeah, and when our rigid panels are flat on the roof and not tilted, the output from both sides is almost identical.
Yeah.
Wesley, someone who asked a question ahead of time, his name is Carl. He asked if you could explain the Freedom eGen optional solar integration system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So when Xantrex developed the eGen system, we wanted to develop a system solution for vehicles that eliminated the use of noisy generators and give customers more convenience, more freedom. So the key component of the eGen system is the lithium battery, which has far more capacity, far more life expectancy in cycles compared to lead acid batteries. And then that lithium battery is like fueled by multiple sources. It could be grid power via your battery charger. It could be your auxiliary vehicle alternator. And it could also be the optional solar system. So solar is optional because not everyone needs solar. But like I said, talked about earlier, if you're boondocking versus if you're in the campground plugged into shore power at the time. So solar is particularly useful if you're boondocking, of course. But so we make it as an optional because not everyone necessarily needs solar. But so that is why we developed the eGen system.
Sounds good. We've got a question from Marcos, and he said, he asks, how can I test the jumper wire from the control module to the inverter to make sure that the cable isn't the issue? His inverter has voltage, but the control panel does not light up or turn on the inverter, and the control switch does work. He's tried it on another vehicle. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I should make assumptions. So if it's one of the newer ones with a network cable, the standard we use is just a Cat5 cable, and there are Cat5 cable testers that you can pick up for fairly inexpensive. If it's a phone cable, same thing, just test the phone cable. And most of these testers have a base unit and then a separate unit. So make sure they're unplugged from both sides before you connect anything. Connect the base unit to one side, and it'll go in a sequence of LED lights or something like that. You take the other end, plug it to the other end of the cable, and just test your run. If you do have a circuit that's off, which I'm guessing that's what it is, most of the time these phone cables or network cables don't break in the middle. You end up just getting a bad crimp on one end or the other. So if you've ever crimped cables before, if not, find somebody who has. You can always just cut the end off, put a new end on it, recrimp it, retest it before you connect it. And that way, if you cut off one end, gives you the same problem, the problem's on the other end, and then you got to cut off that one. But yeah, I don't see a lot of cables that have flaws in the middle of the cable. It's usually on one of the ends.
Okay, check the ends of those cables. John has a question about solar for Wesley. He says, I don't want solar for dry camping. He's mostly interested in solar to maintain chassis and coach batteries while he's in storage for about 60 days at a time. He's also hoping that he might be able to run his residential refrigerator. He's got a 40-foot coach, and he's wondering how much solar he would need. He has an inverter, large batteries, and a tiny solar panel that came with the coach. Wesley, your thoughts?
Yeah, so few comments there. 60 days storage is a pretty long time. So when 60 days, it's quite a bit of time for that parasitic loads. You can still draw down your battery down to nothing. So still having a small solar panel is still helpful. So know how large your battery bank is, but I would recommend maybe starting with 100 watts or 200 watts of solar and seeing how things are, just even after 30 days. And if that's not enough, then add another solar panel. But if you're not, like I said, if solar is more for off-grid purposes, but if you're not interested, if you're not wanting solar for dry camping, then I assume you're probably at the campgrounds plugged into shore power. So, but you probably still want them. Yeah.
I think
we would want to chime in on that too in regard to the residential refrigerator.
Running. We also have a Mountain Air with a residential refrigerator.
Yes, and again, from our initial testing when we were doing our power audit for ourselves for determining how much battery and solar we needed, we found that the residential refrigerator in a 24-hour period of time uses 150 amp hours of power.
That's with our 17 cubic foot Samsung fridge.
So that you're talking about a pretty significant investment in power just to keep the refrigerator running.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking if you're leaving the RV stored for 60 days and not using it in that interim, you'd be much better suited by just shutting the refrigerator down.
Yeah, I think, John, what you're going to run into that's the biggest problem of all is what we all run into with wanting the benefits of a residential fridge, but not necessarily wanting to be plugged in all the time to use it. It is a challenge. And in your situation, if you don't have a fairly good solar bank to power it and lots of sunny days, you could literally end up coming back to a real mess in your RV if the fridge goes down. And I would suggest that you would be better off emptying your fridge and shutting it off.
And it will save you money on solar too, because you'll only need a much smaller system, like Elsie was saying, 1 or 200 watts in order to just keep the chassis and the coach batteries topped up with no load on them.
And if it's very important to you to be able, for a quality of life issue, let's say you just don't want to have to empty the fridge and you're in a sunny part of the world that could support storing the RV with a residential fridge and confidence that you'll have lots of sunshine, I suggest that you change your camping style to utilize all of the solar you're going to need and boondock more often to enjoy it.
That's right. or pay for storage where there's power and just plug in.
One or the other. But the fridge is always the biggest problem.
Yeah, that's a great point, John and Peter. Yeah, it's definitely, if it's 60 days and your fridge is running, then 100, 200 watts is not going to be enough to keep it running. So definitely empty your fridge, unplug it if you're going to go into 60 days of storage.
Yeah. We got a question came in from Gary, and he is asking about if the Xantrex systems are listed in watts or VA. And he wants to know what is the difference between those two and how are your systems listed. Wesley, Don, I'm not sure who to throw this one to, but it sounds difficult.
Don?
I got it. So VA is volt amps. So Watt's law says volts multiplied by amps equals watts. So we do radars in watts. I do know that there are some out there that rate them in volt amps, and the differences have to do with power factor. And I'm not going to get too technical into that, but typically when you're talking about inverters, especially true sine wave inverters, the difference in watts and volt amps is like 0.01 power factor. So it's very close when you're comparing them side by side. It's not worth considering, in my view. They're going to be more similar than anybody will ever notice.
There you go, Gary. There's your answer.
There is another opportunity for a new question. A couple before that too. Did you catch that one?
Go for it. If you see it, go ahead and jump in.
So WC was talking about does Xantrex have an inverter charger that will allow us to set the max input for the shore power to 30 amps, and then set the battery bank to simultaneously provide power during high use periods. And what he's talking about is what we call gen support, even though it's AC input support, we call it gen support. And what that is that's the ability for the inverter to invert or to charge when you're plugged into shore, but you can set a ceiling, and let's say you set the ceiling for to 15 amps. What'll happen is if there's more than 15 amps of load on the inverter will stop charging, start inverting, synchronize with the incoming AC waveform, and push the difference. Let's say if you have your maximum set for 15, but you've got 20 amps of load, the inverter will become a 5 amp inverter and add to that so that the incoming never exceeds that value. And so it's the Freedom SW platform that does that. I think in the mobile market, the Freedom SW is what pioneered it. There's a few other manufacturers that do that now too. But yeah, so the Freedom SW, look at the setting called Gen Support, and it does that very well.
Peter and John, Catherine is asking why you chose a residential fridge instead of a larger 12-volt fridge. Do you have any thoughts you could share with us on that?
Well, when we got our residential fridge, there weren't 12-volt fridges available that were really full-sized.
Yeah, our RV originally came with a 14 cubic foot Norcold 4-door typical propane electric RV fridge. And it went through the many rounds of recalls that Norcold had on those fridges, and then eventually decided, after we'd spent all the time in service appointments getting all those recalls done, decided to call it quits while it was full of food. Of course.
I think you're going to see more and more 12-volt options coming on. We know that there are some in the works.
Yeah.
Some are just
coming
getting
larger and larger.
And they're getting bigger. And the time may come. We now have our third refrigerator in our RV, and we'd like not to swap it out. Although one thing we did learn on this topic, if you're going to put a fridge in your RV, even if the windshield has been removed, to take the old fridge out, bring one in that will fit back out through the door next time.
Don't ask us how we know that.
Well, if you check out the RVgeeks YouTube channel, you'll find out how they got that fridge out the door.
It didn't go out. Well, yeah, it came out the door in pieces.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Spectacular.
We had a question come in for Gerald, and he had a lot of details to ask, but he's asking about the cost differential between putting on more rigid panels versus putting on your lift mechanisms on the panels that you currently have, and kind of balancing that. And then I think an interesting part of his question was, do you find a difference when you're further south, closer to the equator, with how much those lift kits change the angles of the solar and how much is coming in, or is it about the same?
I think it's more about the time of year than the latitude.
Yeah,
we don't go so far north and south. I think if we were talking about the difference between being, in
Alaska and Costa Rica.
Yeah, Alaska and Costa Rica, that would be a bigger deal. I think for us, we do get a lot of questions. Instead of adding lift kits, which are a bit expensive, why didn't we just put more solar panels on? I think that has more to do with our desire to keep our roof accessible and walkable and serviceable, and not wanting to use every inch of the roof for solar. And that partly comes from our roof arrangement on this older RV.
Yeah.
We have a lot of things that stick up on the roof. We have
a lot of things causing shade.
There's a lot of shade being thrown up there. So people may not think about it, but if you have a roof vent here and the refrigerator vent here and a skylight here or whatever else, an air conditioner here, that you can't put a solar panel too close to it, because as soon as you do, you're going to have a shadow cast on it at some point in the day or when you're facing some direction. So what we did was we have installed or seen or helped install a couple of different systems, including yours, Adam. And you'll notice what we did with yours is Adam's system is not designed to tilt, but the solar panels are so far away from anything on the roof that could shadow it. Didn't matter. You never get any shadowing on your panels, right?
Right.
Other than trees.
So we kept them very far away. In our case, we wanted to put so much solar on the roof that we didn't
have that luxury.
We didn't have that luxury of the real estate needed not to worry about shadowing. So then it became, well, with a smaller footprint, what do we do, particularly in the winter? And the reason the winter is such a big factor is twofold. One is because we do more boondocking in the winter than we do in the summer, because we snowbird in the desert. And the other is because the days are very short in the winter and the sun stays so low. So how do you combat that? You tilt the panels up and aim them at the southern sky. And then as the sun comes across low on the horizon,
you're maximizing your output.
All day long, you're getting better solar.
So we typically see on a wintry day in the Arizona desert with our panels tilted, we will see about 30 to 40% increase in output compared to having them flat. So it really does come down to a matter of, if you have the roof real estate to add 30 or 40% more solar to your roof in order to accommodate not tilting them, then you can enjoy your life on the ground and not get up on the roof or not pay the extra for an electric tilt kit like we have. But we do recommend that the tilt kits are a great option if you do not have the real estate that you need and are planning to be in desert, southwest winter environments where the sun is low on the sky and you want to be able to get more power.
Yep.
then yes, tilting them. You don't have to go the route we did with the electric push button.
Oh,
they're very expensive.
We manually tilted for years.
Yeah.
It's very inexpensive. And if you don't want to spend the money on a tilt kit and you don't mind getting up on your roof, the benefits are great. We did a video about why we face our RV east when we boondock. It's primarily in the winter. We face east to get the morning sun in through the windshield to warm us up and to tilt our panels toward the south. And we'll pull in somewhere and put them up. And it's really great.
Yeah.
But not everybody wants to get on the roof
No.
or spend the money on an electric tilt kit.
Yep.
Well, Don, it's that time in the broadcast where I get to ask my favorite question that comes up every time: parallel or series, and what are the benefits of each?
So batteries or inverters?
I think we're talking about.
I think
So all of the above.
I think we're talking
Or
solar.
solar.
I think we're talking solar.
So whether you're talking about solar panels, batteries, or inverters, it's parallel gives you an amperage benefit. So you tie all your negatives together, all your positives together, and you get more amperage on your positive, more amperage on your negative, and it's all the standard voltage, 12 volts or 19 volts or whatever the device is you're talking about. When you go in series, you increase the voltage, but your amperage stays the same. So that's kind of neat when you're, especially if you have solar and you want to add solar, but you don't want to run a thicker cable. You can always take your solar panels, wire them in series, and then use an MPPT controller, which I'm sure Wesley will talk about at some point. But yeah, that's the thing is parallel gives you a amperage benefit. Series gives you a voltage benefit, smaller wire.
Well, that's one of the big things for us. So we have kind of a combined system. We have our panels in a series, like our flexible panels are one long series. So it's positive to negative, positive to negative, positive to negative, one long line. We can use very small 10 gauge cable to do that instead of the much thicker, more expensive 6 gauge cable. So it's less expensive to buy and easier to
work
run.
with, yeah. But also, Don, isn't there advantages as far as shade tolerance when you're talking about parallel versus series?
That's true, but Wesley's the expert on that.
Definitely, shading is always like an enemy of solar panels. And so when you wire panels in parallel, definitely you get probably the best shading protection, because if one panel is shaded, and keep in mind, shading is one of those things that it's not proportional. So if you shade just a little bit of your solar panel, like maybe just fully cover one cell, it's not like you get a loss of like 2 or 3%. You lose a lot more just by shading one cell. So shading has a very significant impact on solar panels, and wiring them in parallel can have that benefit. Now, solar panels do, probably a lot of the solar panels these days, they do have bypass diodes built into the junction box. So that helps mitigate shading if you wire them in series. But definitely parallel is one of the more, the conventional thought process that is still very effective against shading. If one panel is shaded, the other panel still should be able to produce their full output. Whereas in series, one panel shaded, it could potentially bring the whole panel, all the panels in series with it, down as well. So
and that's one of the changes we made after we installed our system. So keep in mind, we have 2 separate systems, but actually the rigid panels are split again. What we had originally was a series of rigid panels and a series of flexible panels, 4 all in line, positive to negative, positive to negative. Well, because we have our rigid panels separated with 2 of them way up at the front of the rig and 2 of them way at the back of the rig, we found we would come into this interesting situation. If the front of the RV had some shade on it and the rear didn't,
we were losing a lot of output from the rigids.
The whole output from the rigid system would be impacted. And what we ended up doing was we rewired on the roof, and we have basically a series parallel system. So the 2 front panels are one series system, and the parallel of that are the 2 panels in the back are on their own system. So it's positive to negative up front, positive to negative in the back, and they have no effect on each other. So when the front of the RV is in the shade and the rear of the RV is in the sun, or vice versa, it doesn't affect the other panels at all because of that paralleling that Wes was talking about.
And we did have to just make sure that when we did that change, that we were not then exceeding the amperage capacity of the cable leading from the junction box on the roof down to the charge controller when we were basically doubling the amperage that was now flowing through.
We had the foresight to use very heavy gauge, 6-gauge wire to go from the junction box on the roof down to the solar controllers and into the battery system. If we had used smaller cable, we would have had a problem in paralleling because, as Wes mentioned, paralleling increases the amperage, which is the current. And Don mentioned that also. That increase in current or amperage is what requires the heavier cable. The beauty about increasing your voltage by going in series is you don't have to worry about increasing the cable size because voltage can be carried over small cable.
Yeah, also a nice thing about using smaller gauge wire is obviously lower cost is the biggest benefit, but also you lower the current resistivity losses. And current, there's a formula called I squared R. So current is squared. So the loss of current is actually not proportional. It's squared when you're running it through cable. So it's definitely a huge benefit to go with smaller cabling. And it's also probably easier to wire. It's more flexible than a heavier, thicker gauge cable.
Much better to work with.
The 6-gauge wire is difficult to handle. And if cost, and it is expensive. Copper's very expensive now. So 6-gauge wire is a lot more expensive. As Adam can tell you, since just this past year, he had to buy all the cabling for his RV.
Yes, but it was well worth it. We enjoyed a good chunk of the winter in the desert Southwest with some of our favorite geeks. So that was
Not
worth
up.
Exactly.
We created Boondocking monsters with Adam and Celine and their kids.
Yeah, there's no stopping us now.
And if I can toss in. Sure. If I can toss in really quick, just because it's such a quick answer, I apologize. Kevin is asking about lithium phosphate. Lithium iron phosphate is the battery to use.
And that's the chemistry of the Xantrex lithium.
The Xantrex lithium batteries are lithium iron phosphate, and other popular batteries are the same. They are extremely safe and stable.
So Tina is asking about turning an awning into solar, and I think the obvious concern there is what happens when it's rolled in, is that it would no longer be effective. So Tina, I know we're coming up with all kinds of new ideas for solar, and as that technology evolves, maybe one day we'll be able to have solar awnings. Before the broadcast, Dave says he's new to solar and he would like to install panels on his 40-foot RV. Can he send the power lines through the fridge vent? I think he's trying to avoid piercing new holes into his roof. And can he hook up the 12-volt power lines there? What are your thoughts?
It's certainly one of the most popular. I would say it's the fridge vent is one of the most popular places to bring cables down. Mm-hmm. But there are some things you got to watch for. I'm sure Wes will mention that with heat and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a great way to run your solar cables from your solar panels down to your charge controllers. But solar panels really have to be connected to a charge controller and then to your battery, and then run your loads off of your house battery. So it's not at all intended to power directly your 12-volt refrigerator. That could be quite disastrous. So not recommended.
It's one of the big misconceptions about solar. People ask all the time things like, can you run your air conditioning off solar? And in actuality, only one thing in the RV runs off solar, and that is the charging of the batteries. Everything else runs off the batteries. Think of it like filling your fuel tank and then having the fuel tank. The batteries are the fuel tank off which everything else runs. The solar panels are the fuel line filling that fuel tank of battery power.
Yeah, I had a question come in right after we got our solar Xantrex system put in place, and somebody was saying they wanted to boondock just on weekends, but they were going to be hooked up at a campground the rest of the week. So they're going to be hooked up at the campground Monday to Friday. They might unhook and go boondocking on the weekends. Is there any reason they would need solar, or would a significant battery bank do the trick for them?
I think. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Let's say, how long are they going to be off grid, and how much power will they need?
Yeah, it goes back to Wes's answer in the very beginning and talking about how to size your system. It all depends on how much power you use in a period of time. So if you're only boondocking for the weekends, are you using a hair dryer, 120 volt hair dryer in order to dry your hair, or are you only running one LED light for 2 hours at night to read a book before going to sleep? So there's no one answer.
Everything gets back to the audit. How much power do you use in a 24-hour period? And do you have the battery capacity to do that without refilling?
And no two RVers, we're like snowflakes. No two RVers are the same. We all have different power needs.
Yep, agreed with that. I mean, in theory, you could have a very large battery bank and you'll be fine. It's topped off because of the campground power on Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, your battery bank is big enough to last you through those 2 days. But it's, of course, you'd have to have a very large battery bank. If your battery bank's smaller, then you may need solar to supplement. So.
Right.
Or if you have
a small generator.
I was going to say, or if you had a small generator. It's always about having alternatives. Mm-hmm. So Adam's situation is that he has 3 solar panels and 200 amp hours of lithium battery. It has a limit, and he has no way to recharge that once it goes down because he doesn't have a generator.
And he knows exactly what percentage power he needs to get the slides
in and the jacks retracted. So in our case, we have a big generator to back us up. We have alternatives, and you have to RV with your needs and alternatives in mind. You can be very carefree about taking your batteries way down if you've got a generator as a backup.
Yes, and I will say that for the size of our system, we haven't run into any concerns except for the day that it was cloudy 3 days in a row, and then I made the decision to park under a tree on the 4th day. That was the problem.
Decisions have consequences, Adam.
With any common sense, I think all of our viewers are going to know better than I did. But I think this question ties into another question we got from Drew, and he's asking about the total cost of a system. And I'm going to guess that there's a lot more factors than just giving a number. Tell me a little bit about the factors we need to consider all around, Don, when we're talking about us putting in a system in general.
Well, again, it goes back to the audit. What do you want? I mean, how much inverter do you need? How much cabling do you need to feed that inverter? How much battery do you need to fill in those gaps? How much solar do you need to let your battery discharge slower? There's not going to be a single number that's going to fit for even a majority of the people. It's going to be all over the map, just depending on what your needs are, what your system's going to look like, what your rig's going to look like, how much you're going to use it. It's a difficult number to nail down.
And are you talking just about upgrading with solar, or are you also then having to add additional batteries? And if you're doing additional batteries, are you then going to lithium? Yep. If you're going to lithium, then do you have other components that now need to be upgraded in order to be lithium compatible, like your inverter charger or your charge controller, or anything like that? So there are a lot of cascading effects.
I'd also like to turn the prism on that question slightly. It's not all about what you put in; it's about what you take out. So, getting back to the example before, we decided not to try to run our air conditioner off our inverter, off our batteries, off our solar, and that brought down the cost dramatically, brought down the requirements needed dramatically. Well, there are other things we do as well. So when we boondock, we change our choices. For example, I let my hair dry naturally instead of using a hairdryer.
Big savings on that one. Big savings.
All right, that is a total joke, of course. A great example, if you're a coffee drinker, how do you make coffee? So when we're plugged into shore power, we have a drip coffee maker. We push the button in the morning and use power to do that. When we're boondocking, we heat water on the stove with propane and do pour over. It's choices like that. We go to bed earlier so that we turn off lights when it gets dark out. We watch less television. We use our handheld devices like our phone or iPad versus our laptop to use less power. So some of this will be determined by what choices can you make to reduce your need for power, not just how much you can produce.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember the very first day you guys took us out off grid. John knows exactly where I'm going with this. I'm about to throw my wife under the bus.
Yes.
And she was ironing outside on our off-grid system while we were trying to figure out how long our batteries were going to last.
And making an Instant Pot dinner as well.
And I'm like, so we don't own an iron, and these clothes are as wrinkled as they're going to be, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
it was hysterical.
That was a learning curve for you guys.
But choices like that, either letting your clothes be wrinkled or not, or buying wrinkle-free clothing. But I know that Celine was very excited about having power off grid for the first time, and boy, did you learn a lesson in your first 24 hours.
Oh, she was so excited. She wanted to use it all. She didn't want anything left to spare.
We were just busy getting the extension cord out, getting ready to plug you guys into us in order to get you recharged.
We didn't need to. We fended her off, and we had a nice sunny day the next day. We were back in the game. Anyway, enough about me. Lisa had a question ahead of time. She asked, with 2 lithium batteries and 2 solar panels on top of an Airstream, how long will she have power? And I think this comes back to needing to do a proper audit to figure out how much power you're going to use. Wesley, can you tell us a little bit more about the Link Pro that helps us do the power audit, the Link Pro that's available from Xantrex?
Yeah, so the Link Pro is a battery monitor. So, we talk about the audit. So an audit is definitely a pretty good way of seeing how much energy you need. So again, energy out equals energy in. And so a battery monitor probably does a lot of that work automatically, because if you started at the beginning of your day and then just use the loads as you typically do, see where how your battery capacity drops from the start of your day to 24 hours later, and take a look, how many amp hours did you use, and then based on the number of amp hours, you can calculate the number of watt hours. And then from there, you can go on to calculate how much solar you need to meet your daily needs.
The Link Pro is one of our favorite tools. We recommend that as being the first thing anyone who is interested in doing a solar install or upgrade for their RV. We always recommend getting the Link Pro first, get that installed, and now you will have an extremely accurate measure of your power needs, and therefore you can then base all of your decisions off of real numbers, as opposed to some scratching on the back of a cocktail napkin, figuring out just guesswork.
And there again, it's about backup. Steve asked about a small portable generator for those cloudy days. Adam and Celine have not gone that route. And Adam, just so people know, Adam and Celine have 3 boys who I'm sure use lots of power for things, whether they're supposed to or not.
I don't know. I think it's Celine that's more the troublemaker in this scenario.
And so when we helped Adam and Celine do their audit, we made a recommendation. We wanted to help them do what we call right sizing the system, which is get the right amount of solar for the right amount of lithium or whatever battery you choose for, to meet your needs. And we told Adam and Celine in advance, we think you need 200 amp hours of lithium, and to run that, 365 watt solar panels, which 160, I'm sorry. And we warned them in advance that despite our estimates of what they needed, it could turn out that it might not meet their needs, and they may end up in the long run wanting to opt to have a small portable generator if it turned out that it didn't. Well, Adam has mentioned already, they have never needed a generator, and they have enough power, even with a 7 cubic foot electric bar fridge out in your outdoor kitchen, right?
That's right. Yeah, we were first able to go off grid in February, and we stayed off grid until the middle of June. And during that time, we were at campgrounds for 9 nighs in that 5-month stretch. And that was simply because we needed air conditioning a couple times.
Well, and you talk about savings. We get a lot of questions. How long does it take for solar and lithium to pay for itself? And we always say it's more about quality of life than about being, pay for it. However, Adam, you just made a perfect point that the biggest way that lithium and solar pay for themselves is the free nights of boondocking versus the $30 and $40 nights at campgrounds. And you saved a ton of money that way this year, right?
Yeah, we definitely did. And as you said, the quality of life, 2 nights ago, we were actually at a campground, and we opened the windows. It was a nice cool night here in the middle of Canada, nice cool breeze. And that nice cool breeze brought in the guy next door who decided to let his campfire smolder all night long. And so I looked over to my wife and I said, I looked over to Celine and I said, I want to go back out boondocking.
Yeah. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, just to reiterate, there are advantages when you are hooked up as well. Currently, we're on, very briefly to reiterate, for anyone who wasn't here, we're on a 30 amp hookup at the moment, and our solar is saving our bacon here because the temperature here is 102 degrees currently. I'm checking to see if it's gone down any. It's
the sun is setting.
Right. So we need all of our, it's dropped. It's now down to 100 right now. So but we
Get out the parka.
We need all of our 30 amp shore power to run our 2 air conditioners. Everything else is coming off the battery bank and the solar panels right now. And we have our panels tilted at the moment, even though it's summer, because we're facing south. So we have our panels pumping out the power right now, even while we're hooked up, and we're here on a monthly stay, so it's keeping our electric bill down too.
So we've got a couple other questions, and I want to make sure that we get to the ones that came in ahead of time. If you have a question, now is the perfect time to put it in the chat. We've got a few more minutes this evening to answer questions. Barry asks, can you buy new lithium batteries and use their OEM charge controller and inverter, the same charge controller that was originally used for lead acid batteries? Don, what do you think about using that same charge controller?
Not if it only has a lead acid charge algorithm. So you really want something that has either a lithium charge algorithm or a custom charge algorithm that you can then just specify. And here's the misconception out there. People say, well, if you put in lithium and then you use some other kind of charger, you're going to blow up the lithium battery. And that's just simply not true. The lithium battery has a BMS, and that BMS's job is to protect that lithium battery from doing anything harmful. It's the bouncer to the lithium batteries. It's going to protect that lithium battery no matter what. But you can end up doing something that's pretty bad, not as bad as obviously a devastating failure, but what will happen is when the battery feels like it's being overcharged or abused in some way, it will turn off. And then, if you've got a solar controller that, let's say, it tries to overcharge that lithium battery, well, it'll bring that voltage up and the battery's fully charged, and then it keeps trying to pump current into that battery. The battery will turn off, and now your solar controller is feeding your entire system. As soon as you have a heavy load, it's going to drop off, and your lights are going to flicker, and it's going to do all kinds of weird things. And you don't want to do that. So if you're using lithium batteries, use a controller, charge sources that are rated for lithium, that have lithium algorithms. You're just going to be happier in the long run.
Okay, one more question for Peter and John. Peter and John, this question comes in from Ron, and Ron really values your input. He loves your blog. He loves your YouTube channel. His big question is, knowing what you know now, would you do solar again if you had the chance? And what would you do differently? What might you do differently if you were to start your system over?
Well, first, I want to I saw Ron's question come in advance. I want to thank you so much. Your words about how helpful we've been have been very meaningful. We really appreciate that. And thank you. We have already made a couple of changes in our system. I mentioned the one where we went from having all 4 of our rigid panels in series to paralleling 2 and 2 to avoid shading. There are also interesting things you can discover about the system. When we installed our current system, we looked at first the solar pre-wiring that Newmar put in our rig when it came from the factory about 16 years ago. And we never really knew how they had hooked it up for sure, because we'd never had reason to look. But now, installing the new system, we had to trace some wiring. And what we found was that Newmar had taken the negative lead from the solar controller and attached it to one of the frame rails.
Yeah, they grounded it to the frame rail instead of taking it all the way back to the battery or to another source. And when we installed our second charge controller, we started noticing some disparities between when they were cutting out, because they were actually seeing different voltages on the battery because they were not grounded to the same spot. So
we also thought that because Newmar had grounded to the chassis instead of to the batteries, that it would be okay for us to do the same thing. So we thought, hey, cool, we'll ground to the chassis rail. And we grounded to a different spot on the chassis rail.
So yeah, that was definitely a learning opportunity.
So it worked, but because of the fact that one was putting out power to the system at a different level, it was seeing
basically one charge controller would think the battery was at a higher voltage than the other, and so it would ramp down. And we were only getting 50% charging because one charge controller thought the battery was closer to full.
So what we did was we disconnected both of them from the chassis rail and went straight to the negative terminal on our Xantrex SC 3000. I'm sorry, Xantrex Freedom SW.
Because that was the closest spot for us to be able to get access to a fat ground cable that goes right to the battery itself.
So that learning experience was, don't ground to your chassis.
But I think bigger picture, because those were all sort of minute details of the installation itself. I think bigger picture from the actual system we have installed. I think the answer for me, I won't speak for both of us, but the answer for me is I absolutely 100% would do this again. And honestly, there really isn't anything in our current system that I would change. It's 100% meeting all of our needs and making it so that we can be where we want when we want.
And we have been able to share our experience in two ways. One is, again, we helped Adam and Celine install their Xantrex system in their rig, and have been able to now share boondocking with our friends who wouldn't have been able to come out and do that with us before.
That's right.
And we've been able to go a step further. We took a friend out in a Class C rig who had never boondocked and didn't have solar or good battery bank. We have so much that we
plugged him into us.
We plugged their RV into ours and provided solar for both rigs for a 3-day stay in the desert for someone who doesn't have solar at all.
It was good for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden he goes, "There's not going to be a bill for this, is there? Like, you're not like the power company."
So it's an infectious thing that once someone discovers the quality of life issues that just melt away when you can enjoy all the comforts of your RV out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sure Adam can tell you now that it is a great thing to be able to do as an RVer.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Don, I want to throw you one more question before we sign off here. And that question is, what is something that you think people get wrong when they're doing their solar install? What's that one problem that seems to come up over and over again, or the confusion that seems to be front and center?
I think the number one thing that people get is they make the assumption that they can get solar and they'll run their entire system, and then they go and they price it out and they get what they get, and then they get disappointed because it doesn't feed their entire system. You know, I tell people, you put solar in so that your battery discharge is slower, unless you really scale back your usage, like John and Peter talked about. Scale back your usage so that you are on par with what's coming in. I think that's the number one thing that people kind of get blindsided by is they say, oh, if I fill my roof with solar, I can run everything, including blenders for the margaritas and air conditioning and everything else. It's not realistic.
Well, thank you everybody for all the questions that came in tonight during our broadcast. We still have 80 people who are watching, so I want to thank everybody who watched, who asked a question, and I want to thank Peter and John for hanging out with us tonight, and Don and Wesley, of course. Peter and John, before we go, if somebody's watching on the Xantrex channel or they found this broadcast on YouTube and they want to learn more about what you do and how you do it, where can they track you guys down?
We're in a couple of places. We're not too heavy on social media, so you won't find us on Twitter or Facebook, but we do have Instagram. We're on YouTube, of course, as RVgeeks, and our blog is that's THE, RVgeeks.com. And last plug will be for the television show, for anybody who isn't aware. We also are just starting to film season 4 of the Discovery Channel TV show, The RVers, which Adam participates with us on as well. And if you haven't yet seen The RVers, it was just recently released in both Canada and the US on iTunes. So season 3 is now available on iTunes.
You can see us upgrading Adam's trailer.
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the segments we did with Adam and Celine was showing a lot about the installation of Adam and Celine's system on their travel trailer.
Freedom XC inverter charger and the Xantrex solar panels.
And we keep promising that on our YouTube channel, there will be a video more in depth about the installation of your system.
It is coming.
It is coming. We apologize. We have been extremely busy with our blog and the show, and we also build websites for RV parks for a living with Adam again as well. You notice there's a lot of cross-feeding going on here. So I promise we will get a video up with greater detail, but subscribe to us. Best place to go really is the RVgeeks.com and subscribe for our newsletters.
So Don, Tech Doctor, if somebody wants to watch your Tech Doctor videos, how can they track those down?
The easiest way to find them is to go to Xantrex.com, go to support, the Tech Doctor. There's other that you can download and do whatever you want to. And then at the bottom, there's a link that says Tech Doctor Live. That takes you directly to the YouTube channel. Tech Doctor Live has about 12 videos, and a lot of them have even been dubbed into Spanish and French. So take a look at that.
And Wesley, if somebody has a specific question about one of the products available from Xantrex, what's the best way for them to ask a question about a specific product?
Yeah, you can ask on our YouTube channel, on one of our videos, or on our Facebook channel, or on our website. You can reach out to our tech support team, and those are some great ways to get in touch with us if you have any questions.
And I'd like to thank Adam for hosting this. Adam, you make it so much easier than when we have to do this all. But Adam, maybe you could mention where people could find you as well. And I want to just give a very quick introduction of who Adam is. He is our partner in crime in many, many ways. And
he's not a criminal, though.
A dear friend who's multi-talented tech guy who's here running this today because of that. But Adam, where can people find you and Celine and your 3 boys?
Yeah, well, the best way to track us down is on Instagram at the RVers Family on Instagram, and you can see all about our adventures, and we post all kinds of silly stuff there, like what it's like for 5 people to live in 273 square feet. And we have a lot of fun, and our boys are a lot of fun, and we only show the good moments on Instagram. So that's the best place to track those down. I just want to say thank you to everybody who chimed in, who left a comment, who watched. You're the reason we're here, and you're the reason that this is so much fun. And on that note, I think we will sign off, everybody. Good night. Thank you for hanging out.
Everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Don. Thanks,